Okay.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar this morning. As you can see, Caroline and I are at our home offices in the middle of this quarantine, but we do appreciate you taking some time out this morning to talk about some trends in retail development. We had planned this webinar since several weeks back before the outbreak, before our lives started to get a little bit shifted up a little bit. But as we started talking about and planning and say, hey, do we need to pivot about this webinar? We started talking about what was going on, what we were seeing, and some trends in our new normal for now. And the more we talked about it, the more we saw that there were a lot of parallels between what we were seeing now and some of the trends that we had planned on talking about of what was driving some of these breakfast concepts across the country. So we decided to stick with it, and we're kind of going to marry these two concepts, hopefully give us a little bit of break, talk about some food and some good news in the midst of everyone's lifestyle change now. So just to kind of get started, my name is Charles Parker. I'm a project director here at the Retail Coach, and obviously I'm joined by Caroline Hernsberger, one of our retail recruitment specialists. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. This is being recorded, so we will send out a recording to all the attendees, as well as a slide deck after the fact. We are going to be doing a few polls throughout this webinar as well. One, I'm going to start right now, talking about asking really where are you working from right now. I know that a lot of us are working out with a few different pieces with how our work is going now. Obviously in our home office. I've got our booth set up behind me now looking at this. I'm not going to be able to use it for the Carolinas ICS conference next week or even Recon moving forward. We've got some polls coming up. Looks like we're about 70-30 working from home, which is probably about what we expected looking at that with where folks are right now and kind of the big piece of the new normal right now and how this outbreak is affecting all of us. So like I said, I'm Charles and Caroline, and really want to get started with looking at this before we get into it. For those of you that are not familiar with our firm, let Caroline talk a little bit about what we do and how we help communities across the country.
Yeah, so good morning. Thank y'all for being here. Hopefully, if you're working from home or working from your office, we can give you just a little bit of change of scenery this morning. And as Charles said, talk about these emerging breakfast concepts. Charles and I have been talking about this for a while, but what's funny is I think Charles and I are both really big fans of going to these restaurant concepts ourselves. So it's kind of fun for us to talk about this subject. But a little more about the Retail Coach. So we are a retail recruitment firm, meaning that we recruit retail, restaurants, entertainment, you name it, but still that economic development that brings in revenue through taxes to your community. We have worked in municipalities across the United States. We have worked in over 35 states, and I think that personally think that we are the premier retail recruitment firm in the United States. 85% of our clients are repeat clients. We have very happy clients, and we love working with our communities year in, year out. And it's really fulfilling to see the retail that we're able to bring. And so I hope to, as we go through this, you'll get to hear a little bit about how we work and what we work. But I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Charles to get started.
Right. So talking about these breakfast and really their breakfast lunch concepts across the country, this is one of the concepts that we've seen some major growth in the last few years. It's a new type of concept relative to the breakfast lunch industry. And the brands that we're talking about today are much different than kind of the traditional breakfast restaurants. These aren't like the diners that have been around for a long time. And Caroline, I want to touch on a little bit about how maybe some of the concepts we're talking about, the First Watches of the world, are different than those.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this idea of a breakfast concept is not new. We've certainly had IHOP, we've had Waffle House, we've had Huddle House, we've had Denny's, several others throughout the years and for many years that are usually breakfast only or an expanded breakfast menu. But those are really geared towards, if you want a greasy eggs and bacon meal, something that may be open 24 hours. They're for people who are on the interstates who want something when nothing else is open, who want a greasy meal, you know, different things. They're definitely favored by truck drivers or children or college students, but this is a totally new trend that we're talking about today, which is the trendier breakfast concept. That's gonna differ a little bit from those traditional breakfast restaurants. You know, people are really wanting, they're wanting some different concepts that, like, for franchisees to open, or someone who wants to open a restaurant. Maybe they want to open a restaurant that they're still able to go home and put their families to bed at night. These concepts that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, or that we're talking about right now, are really those type of restaurants that are open in the mornings and the afternoons, or morning to lunch, and they're able to have, for more of the foodies, the people who want to go buy avocado toast, or, you know, that sort of thing, they're able to have just that savory breakfast meal. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about these emerging breakfast concept trends.
Right, and exactly. And First Watch is probably one of the ones that are most famous for that avocado toast or an egg white omelet, more of that healthier type breakfast. The one that you can go and run a marathon and then have it go to breakfast afterwards and not feel bad about completely ruining all the effort you just did running your marathon. So these are just a few brands that we highlight to kind of highlight what we're talking about. So First Watch is probably one of the bigger ones, one of the leaders out of Florida. They've got over 300 stores now. They took over the Egg and I. About right now, through the 300 stores, I think they're about split evenly between corporate and franchise-owned stores, but they're really looking for expansion of franchise over the next 2 or 3 years. You know, their goal over the next 2 years is to double in size, have over 600 locations across the country. And you're seeing more and more of them pop up in shopping centers and grocery anchored centers across the country. It's kind of the leader in this aspect. Eggs Up Grill is kind of another one out of South Carolina. They were recently acquired by the same venture capital firm that took over Pure Bar and helped expand them to the number of locations they have across the country. So they really right now are starting that major growth mode. You know, they've got about over 40 stores. Only one is corporately owned. It's their test kitchen in Spartanburg. So the 100+ stores they're looking to have in the next 2 years are all franchise driven. So they're looking for community partners. I spoke with Ted Eaton from Eggs Up Grill about a week and a half ago, talking about what their expansion plans are. And one of their core values is having that community partner. And I think that's a big piece of why these concepts are becoming so successful, is because they do have that local input. They have that local restaurant feel while still being kind of the backing of a corporate. They have the capital of the corporate to make some of these larger shopping centers type work. And then Snooze is kind of a little bit on the other end of the spectrum out of Denver. They've got about 40 stores and are looking to open 10 or 15 a year, and they are all corporately owned. Their CEO is known for being manically controlling with how they do it. It's kind of his term and how he talks about how much control they like to have. They've also got a full bar. You know, they're kind of, you know, the CEO is talking about how they didn't invent day drinking, but they perfected it. And that's kind of a little bit more towards the millennial type aspect of what, you know, breakfast and brunch, this whole brunch wave that we're seeing now has come across. So these are just a few brands that what we're talking about and seeing that really are in major growth mode.
You know, Charles, you and I were talking earlier about another reason that these concepts are becoming bigger now is because with a lot of the healthy eating and different diets, fasting is encouraged now, and maybe like an 8-hour or 12-hour fasting period. And a lot of the diets, or just by personal preference, people would like to have that savory meal earlier in the day, but don't necessarily want to go and have the big hamburger or the big steak. And so that's another reason that I think that these trendier restaurants, or this type of restaurant, is really coming to the forefront right now as well.
Exactly. And there's kind of a number of reasons why we're seeing these types of brands grow across the country. You know, they've got cross-generational appeal. Really, breakfast is kind of underserved by those corporate brands in this segment. And there's a lot of trends going into, you know, why folks are eating more at home. People are working more remotely, and then concepts like this kind of provide a niche in the real estate aspect of it that has made, I know a lot of the deals that you and I have worked on together, Caroline, having a breakfast concept like this has helped them come together, kind of be that third or fourth tenant in the mix to ultimately to fill up a small shopping center or a shadow center outside of a Publix or a grocery center anchor. So kind of going through that a little bit, this is a typical picture of Snooze AM Eatery, and it's a wide appeal. There are several interviews with the CEOs of all these companies, and all of them talk about how they have such a wide appeal. And looking at this picture, you kind of see a large gap in age groups. You see several children in this picture. You see millennials and Gen Z sitting at the bar having cocktails. There are families in the mix. So whether you're having breakfast with your grandparents or going out with your friends to grab a 11 a.m. mimosa, there's a wide range of folks that like to have, that social aspect. Looking at, breakfast and having that be another reason to go out, even during these times of Corona outbreak, is kind of one of the things that people are missing most is brunch right now. You're looking on social media, the top thing people are missing out on is like, hey, I can't go do brunch with my friend right now because there's nowhere to go. So I think on the backside of this outbreak, when we get back to our normal, this is going to be something that people are going to flock to and continue to push moving forward. Additionally, why this is kind of an emerging area is that there is no real corporate, major player in this industry, in this concept. You have the Dardens that have, the lunch and the dinner concepts. They have the steakhouses. You can name 5 or 6 steakhouses. If you want to go get a sandwich for lunch, you can list off 5 or 6 names to go get a sandwich or a sub at lunch. You're talking about breakfast, there's really not a whole lot of national players that you can count on. And breakfast is one of those ones that's notorious for having more of a local type flair, where it's a one-off restaurant, where it's Stevie's Diner in Fort Worth, or anywhere else that has kind of a local, it's just local community members that So there really is this opportunity for brands like Eggs Up Grill to grow very quickly, because it's kind of in a vacuum where there's not that major player taking things over.
Right. And as you mentioned earlier, I mean, the people that, even if they aren't the franchisees of these breakfast concepts, maybe they're the general manager of it who opened it for the corporate. And so you walk in and you see that familiar face that's walking around that's saying, how was your drink? How was your this? And, they don't own 50 of them. If it's the general manager, he is community based, and he's the one that's maybe sponsoring your kid's soccer team or whatever it may be. Another thing that we've seen with the breakfast trend with one of the franchisees is we had a physician who wanted to do something as an investment, but also wanted to do something that his wife could run. And so he certainly had the capital. And so his wife opened one of these, and I can't remember which one of the ones that it was, but she opened one in their community. And so again, we're seeing community partners instead of the big corporate owned 16 brands, restaurant brands.
Right. And to that point, there are more options, whether it be a local independent person or a major brand, to go out and make money, because, the trend of us as Americans are spending more and more money away from home. We're eating more and more of our meals away, or we're having them delivered, and being prepared away from home. So, and that's a trend that I think is going to continue to move forward. Even though in the middle of this outbreak, more and more people are cooking and they're finding their culinary skills, there's a lot that's still going to be, all right, let's go back out. Let's have someone else make this dinner for me. Let's have someone else make breakfast for me. I think that's a trend that we're going to continue to see in the long term. And it's really going to help the expansion of the food delivery apps, which we'll touch on in just a minute.
Certainly.
And then another reason I think these concepts are growing so successfully is developers are finding that there are really good partners to have. This is just one example of co-tenancy that we're seeing across the country, where you can have a First Watch or an Eggs Up Grill right next to a breakfast, right next to a sandwich concept. So you can have 2 restaurants right next to each other that aren't in competition, that work in harmony. A lot of that goes back to the store hours that, First Watch, these breakfast concepts shut down at 2:30, 3 o'clock. So there's a little bit of lunch overlap, but really dinner is wide open. So there's not that competition. You can see them work in harmony. And also works with parking as well. That you're going to have a breakfast rush. That's going to be gone by lunch, and especially on weekends when big brunch days go out. You can still fit in some higher grade tenants, not have them compete with one another, and really fill out your shopping center with high quality tenants, and not have to go with the service industry, whether that be dry cleaning or nail salons. We're seeing more and more developers kind of have this higher rent paying tenant and fit in. It's really been a really neat puzzle piece as we see across the country.
Yeah.
And then lastly, Kind of the biggest underlying effect that we're seeing, and kind of one of the main reasons that we kind of stick with this breakfast concept, was this trends in working remote, and how much it played a role in not just breakfast, but all the food industries, and really had a ripple effect across the real estate industry as a whole. And you see in the last 5, 10, 15 years, there's been a tremendous amount of growth in work from home. We're doing it today, figuring out how it works. 70% of us here on the webinar are working from home through circumstances, but there are ways to be productive. And I think that's going to continue to play a role in real estate.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, one of the ways that works with real estate is when you're working remotely, any of the literature that you read, and I've seen this on the news lately too, but before COVID-19, everyone said make a schedule, stick to a routine. And that routine for a lot of remote workers is still maybe wake up at 6, go work out from 7 to 8. And then if their workday starts at 8, even if they're working remotely, people can still say, hey, let's have that meeting at Snooze, or let's have that meeting at Another Broken Egg or Eggs Up Grill or whatever it is. And so these are giving people the opportunity that while they're out starting their day with their workout or whatever it is, leading straight into that first meeting and having it at kind of a social place instead of heading right into the WeWork or back to home to the office. Another trend that we're seeing with remote work is people who, take their kids to school. And then right after they take their kids to school, maybe stop and have just a few minutes to socialize with a friend, meet up for a savory breakfast or something. And then 8:30, 9 o'clock, go back home, start your work day and work 9 to 6. Instead of having that lunch break, have that breakfast break while you're already out. And so there are a lot of ways that working remotely, as you can see, you're really changing the trends of retail and restaurants.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, talking about the routine. And as we go to a more remote-based society, how is the workday going to change ultimately down the road, whether it be the next year, the next 5 or 10 years? How is that 8 to 5 going to be changing when there's so much more flexibility in how we can get work done, whether that's on a phone, working from a Starbucks, or working from a Snooze? How is our routine and our opinion of what a full workday looks like is ultimately going to change? And I think having those places to go, that's not just a coffee shop where you can go and have a more traditional, maybe a lunch meeting at breakfast type options, how is that going to affect overall the workforce, the flow of how a normal work day and how people are being productive? And I think these concepts are going to be a major point of that moving forward. So looking just a little bit closer at remote work, leading up to COVID-19, the outbreak, about 3.5% of the workforce, worked at home at least half the time, at least full, 50% of the time we're working from their home office. They have their bookshelves in the back of their picture, like I do here, trying to make sure and be productive at home. But over the last really 15 years, working from home has been the fastest category in the workforce. As you see, it's more than 10% faster than the rest of the workforce, and it's 47 times faster than the self-employment population growing. So it's becoming a more and more trend, even before what we're doing now with the outbreak. And up to now, 43% worked at least some part-time from home. And I think that's a big piece, saying, hey, we were already headed this way, but what are we doing now? How is this, quarantine period going to play ripple effects in the future? And global workplace analytics is kind of on the forefront and talking about, how this interruption is going to kind of reset us as a workforce moving forward. And they've had estimates that, people continuing to work and being able to work remotely at home is saving U.S. employers over $35 billion per day. So it's not like people are just packing it up and going home. They're still being productive. And I think because managers and top brass are seeing that there is still going to be productivity going on in this time, it's going to speed up our adoption of remote work so much faster. There's not going to be that fear of ripping the Band-Aid off and saying, hey, are we really going to be productive? They're going to see it firsthand because they don't have a choice. And then also this is going to be the new normal with the disaster preparedness. And, the next outbreak, when the next one comes, this is going to be the standard, at least for the time being, that everyone's going to pack it up, shelter in place like we're doing here in Dallas, where you can't go out unless for essential areas. So it's going to have to be part of how they plan for things. So, it's going to be, like I said, pushing and forcing their hand to do this. So at the outbreak of this, are they really going to call everybody back and say, hey, we've got this overhead for offices, and office space that even before this have been vacant 40 to 50% of the
Right.
time, with people either traveling or doing trade shows or working remotely part-time anyways. How is that going to reset and saying, hey, we can still get our job done? We did it during the outbreak. This is a really good point that we can save money, become even leaner operations, and have that cost saving opportunities. And we see it now from office space even down to retailers. Like I toured Chick-fil-A headquarters not too long ago, and most of their employees don't have set offices. Most of them, they have office space they can go to. They've also got Wi-Fi throughout their trails on campus. We can go and have a picnic table basically in the woods with the Wi-Fi right above you. And even there is flex office space there. So how is this going to continue to push us as a workforce to say, hey, we're remote, and if you're cooped up in your house, what can be your social outlook to go out and have that social interaction, because we still are a social species. And Kate Lister, the president of Global Workplace Analytics, talks about, her estimate is that about a quarter of the population, the workforce population after this, will be working at home at least multiple days a week, which is a really huge jump to think about. But when you have this forced adoption like we're having now, it's going to lead to some of this stuff, and they're going to see how it can work. And I think that's going to be a really big piece to think about of, hey, if we have that many people working from home that many days a week, how is that going to affect the restaurant industry? How is that going to affect traditional retail and brick and mortar? How is that going to affect e-commerce as well? So there's a lot of ripple effects it's kind of a good time now to be thinking about it as, what are we doing to get ourselves prepared and kind of come with this oncoming change?
Yeah.
And then kind of going a little bit deeper into the outbreak, we've all seen the headlines of adjusted store hours and major brand closings. Caroline, I know you've talked to a lot of folks that have kind of adjusted what they're doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we're seeing it on a national level. We're seeing it on local levels and regional levels. And, it's for a while, people were putting out like national chains were adjusting their store hours and going ahead and announcing closures before it was even mandated by the government. But we've certainly seen grocery stores adjust their hours more out of the need to be able to restock their shelves than anything. But we're seeing grocery stores, pharmacies, Walmart adjust their store hours. And who would have ever thought that these 24-hour stores would start to say, hey, we can only open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. right now. Major brand closings, J. Crew, Ann Taylor, Nordstrom, which broke my heart, but I'm not going into one anyway. But a lot of these major brands went ahead and announced closures for 2 weeks, and they did that last week. When a lot of the news really started to come out that this was getting a lot more serious. And so once again, we never would have thought that we would have seen these major brands take the leads in closures, but they certainly have. And finally, restaurants are adapting. And where the restaurants are still able to maintain to stay open, they are doing curbside pickup. They're offering delivery. I saw on a local Facebook page of a restaurant last night, someone said, are you delivering outside of the city limits? Because we live in more of a rural area. And he said, I will deliver as far as I need to give my employees a reason to come into work. And so we're really seeing how the restaurants are adapting to that. To see how this is going to go into the future. Our local McAllister's Deli, for example, right now, I think has 2 curbside pickup to-go signs, parking spots dedicated to curbside pickup. I think moving forward, when these restaurants start doing new site development, that we're going to see more of those upfront parking spots designated to curbside pickup, where you call in your order and they're able to go ahead and bring it right out to you, because people are going to get used to calling that in. People are going to realize how easy it is, because during this time, if you're able to, your restaurants are staying open and you're able to call in an order and go and pick it up and they bring it out to your car and you've never done it before, then, all generations are going to think, wow, this is amazing. And then as different seasons come up, I mean, I know that COVID-19 is going to be an ongoing thing, but even flu season next fall, if my kids were at home sick, I'm probably going to utilize curbside pickup more once I start getting more used to using it right now, just because I realized how easy it was and there are more parking spaces available for it. So I think that this is really going to change the way that we see a lot of businesses do things.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, I've got another poll here talking about food delivery apps. Kind of look at have you ever used a food delivery app? Which ones have you used, and how does it compare between now and before the outbreak? So go ahead and look at that, and let's hear your responses on what you're doing now, whether it be Grubhub, Uber Eats, DoorDash. Get a few more. We got about most of us coming in now. Got a few more trickling in to look at this. And it looks like a lot of us have not used a food delivery app. So now is a really good time to maybe start looking at some of that piece. So this is really, I think, part of the future aspect of it, and maybe it's because it's more of a generational type shift, with more millennials being more used to using things like this, or going up to windows like we see there. The dog at the takeout window there at Strange Brew locally in Starkville, Mississippi, or even here in Texas, Governor Abbott last week opened up that, released some of the alcohol sales in the state. And, the famous El Arroyo restaurant down in Austin, and their famous sign said, "Holy smokes, we can deliver margaritas now." And it's become a kind of a relief aspect that Texas, I know Florida has done it as well, open up alcohol delivery. Fresco's is one, house marks to go. And as a retail consultant, I had to do my due research and take one to go. So you see the margarita there in a bag, my grown-up Capri Sun. But there are ways and adaptions that the government are taking. Even restaurants are saying, hey, we realize that people still got to eat. They still don't want to cook at home. The trends have shown that for the last 10 years, that they want to, prepared food. How are we doing what we can to adapt to that? So it's going to be expansion in partnerships with Grubhub or Uber Eats. And then also, how do we use social media to let them know that, to let those ones that haven't used food delivery app in the past, how do we help persuade them and help them force that adoption? Say, hey, if you want to partake, if you want to still have, your Chick-fil-A nuggets in the morning, you don't have to go through it and get it. You can have them delivered. And I think that's a big piece moving forward with a lot of the restaurant aspect of it.
Right, Charles, if you remember when we were in Fort Worth at the ICSC event in January, back when we were allowed to go to conferences and be around lots of people, we were talking to Corner Bakery, and Corner Bakery back in January was talking about site selection even then. And she was saying, and I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but like 20 to 30% of their business was dining. The rest of it was third-party delivery, so Uber Eats, that sort of thing, local pickup, the restaurant themselves, Corner Bakery, delivering catered meals to hospitals or big workplaces for lunch meetings, and then just your regular curbside delivery. And so we're going to see such an uptick in restaurants signing up for third-party delivery, agreeing to work with Uber Eats, or if there's a local one, whatever that may be, and then increasing drive-throughs, which I know you want to talk about as well, and then just starting to use the curbside delivery more, and also doing catering and to-go orders and really beefing up that menu.
Yeah, exactly. Restaurants and either other retailers going to have to, invest more in their delivery chain, the last mile that we've been talking about in a lot of our trends for a while now in our monthly webinars. This is kind of been the final push to force a lot of their hands, saying, hey, we have to invest in this omni-channel marketing. We have to invest in being online and having that distribution chain that we can reach our end consumer at their home, because that's where a lot of the folks are at now, and how we're really moving towards the future with the workforce.
Right. One of my favorite local boutiques in a major metropolitan area, I saw posted on social media yesterday and said, the last 4 days we have worked tirelessly to create our first ever website. And so my mind was blown that they didn't have a website yet. And I'm trying to keep myself away from it. But anyway, it's really forcing even retailers and smaller boutiques to think outside the box.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that really we talk about, and I talk about a lot of the small business workshops that we do with a lot of our communities, where we sit down and we work with the local businesses. And it really surprises me how much of those local businesses and boutique owners, haven't invested in the online presence. And really, there's no cost to it. It doesn't cost anything to have a Yelp page. You can have a really affordable website where it just has a link to it, because there's Bright Local runs a survey every year talking about how folks find local restaurants, And it's over like 80% of folks search at least once a week for local concepts. They still want that experience. If we're talking about the generational shift, they want to go and have, whether that's a cool boutique where they can only get, certain clothing or certain jewelry or certain cool knickknacks that they can only get from a certain area, or it's food that no one else can get, that they can put on social media, kind of rub it in their friend's face saying, hey, I'm doing this, you can't do it, you're missing out. And that's the point of social media, is to make people jealous, right? So I think those are the type of pieces that we're seeing on the local business side of things, that we're being pushed towards it now. You're not really having a choice. You have to compete online on some level, even though there is still an important need for brick and mortar. Even in this outbreak now, I think, if they didn't have brick and mortar locations around you, how are they going to work with Grubhub or Uber Eats? They have to have the distribution network, if nothing else. So even in these times when, we hear the doom and gloom, and we'll touch on this in a minute with some of the folks that are hiring, yes, brick and mortar is kind of under a stressor right now, but at the same time, if they didn't have these physical locations, especially restaurants, they still couldn't be making any money right now. So there is still a need for having physical locations. And kind of going back to what you mentioned a minute ago, I know you talked about the ICSC Fort Worth, and obviously now we're under postponement of events, in the retail industry, sports world, everything. Recon's obviously been postponed for now. I know you've been reaching out to a lot of our contacts, and brokers and site selectors about travel bans. What's some of the news and feedback you've gotten right now? What are folks doing? Are they being productive right now? What's kind of the pulse?
Yeah, so from what it seems from a recruitment standpoint, when I'm sending recruitment emails or making phone calls, interestingly, some of the folks who have not been so quick to respond in the past are responding right away. I think there are many reasons for that. Number one is we've all got our phones next to us at all times because we've got information overload. I'm getting school assignments through one app for my kids. I'm getting work emails. I'm getting updates on the virus. I'm getting this, I'm getting that. And so we're all just trying to stay connected and see what's going on. But also when you're at home and you're not used to being at home or working remotely, as soon as something comes across, you're able to respond to it a little bit faster. And so what we saw in the past was a lot of our site selectors and real estate managers would have an out of office automated email that would come back to us that would say, I'm out of the office visiting sites for the next 2 weeks. I'll respond to everything when I get back on, Wednesday, April 1st. And then Wednesday, April 1st would come, and that got further down in their email inbox, and we never heard back from them, and we'd have to follow up. Now they're not out of the office. They're not traveling. They're right there. And so they're able to go ahead and look into this market and give us some more feedback. Another thing that I think that I'm starting to see as a trend is before our site selectors and our real estate managers had and still have real estate teams in the office and their own corporate analytics that they can pull to look at sites, to look at communities and that sort of thing. But a trend that I'm kind of hesitant to say that I'm seeing, but I really think I'm starting to see a little bit, is that now our site selectors and real estate managers, because they have a little bit more time on their hands, are not relying on the automated data that those corporate analytics are giving them. So when we're sending a site or when we're sending a community for them to consider at this time of working it from home, where travel is basically on hold, from the corporate level, then they're doing their own due diligence, and they're actually looking closer at the market profiles that we're sending, the demographics that we're sending, the feasibility profiles specific to that brand that we're sending. And they're starting to look at the numbers and realize that the way that we drew the trade area is a more accurate representation of just pulling this and that and the other. And they're really looking and seeing, okay, what is the traffic on I-69? What would the traffic count be if I put an interstate location right there where she's staying? And so I think that's a pro that we are certainly seeing. Now, having said that, of course, development is certainly on hold in many places, but I think that a lot of our real estate managers and site selectors and brokers are going ahead and having, their top priority list for when they get the green light to be able to say, okay, I've done my due diligence. I did this. I called this property owner. I went ahead and put this contract in front of the legal team. Now that this is lifted, let's go ahead and hit go on 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so I think that that's a very positive thing that we're going to see real estate wise and site selection that's going to come out of this.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because I know with a few of the developers and construction guys I've touched base with in the last week or so, with the Fed cutting rates, they're pretty intrigued with, hey, what can we do when kind of the quarantine has been lifted? What can we do and get some things on the books under this lower rate? Because a lot of the folks that I've talked to, whether that's on the economic side of things or otherwise, there still seems to be a pretty positive feeling of a bounce back that will come from this. This is kind of in terms of a great pause of 2020 rather than a recession. Is things that you've seen on LinkedIn and other aspects that people are really still have a level of optimism about how the economy will return once we are able to go out and spend money and kind of get back to our normal activity. That people really are not spending as much money right now because they are eating more at home. They are going to the grocery store and stocking up. And once that food's in your pantry, you're going to want to cook it rather than going down the street and picking something up. So there are a lot of folks that I've talked to that they're not spending as much right now, and they're going to have kind of this savings up, and we'll see what happens with the stimulus package and if there is some debt relief that's involved with some of that. But it's still an interesting time to say, hey, people are still going to be optimistic. We're not having a complete, doom and gloom look at with a lot of the folks that we're talking about. And to that point, we had a really good conversation with one of the major national restaurant chains last week, talking about how they're still looking for locations, kind of echoing what you just said.
Yeah, certainly. As this real estate manager said, and I'll just go ahead and read it because we said, would you consider this site? And he said, yeah, our expansion plans are still unknown, but as of now, even though our stores are essentially closed, we're still pursuing new locations for when this quarantine breaks. For now, we're moving forward on all of our active sites under development. And so I think that's really positive news. As you were mentioning the economy, our President Trump, certainly thinks that the economy is going to bounce back sooner rather than later, and we can all hope that that's true. And so we are seeing positives. Now, I do want to, report back that last night I got an email from a larger national brand that owns several different restaurant concepts that said I'd sent an email to a real estate manager that I speak with often, and was asking her about a site, and it obviously was forwarded directly to her boss, and he responded to me and said, I'm sorry, but she's been furloughed temporarily, which is like a temporary layoff instead of a straight up termination. And I think that probably helps with unemployment benefits and whatnot as well. But he said she's been furloughed, as have many of our employees. Check back in 60 days and see if she's been able to come back to work. And so, I was very disheartened to hear that. I certainly understand that decision that they had to make. So while there is a lot of positive, all that to say, there are some companies and some brands that are absolutely still having to say, we're on hold, check back in 30 days, check back in 60 days. But the positive point of that I was reflecting on this morning was he didn't say, because we've had to put some employees on furlough, we're a year out from development. He said, check back in 60 days and she can pursue this opportunity. And so I think that was still a very positive response.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're doing a lot of the outreach. I know you and I worked on a questionnaire this week that we're going to be sending out to a lot of our contacts as well.
Yeah, certainly. So because we've gotten a lot of these questions and a lot of feedback, we've had a lot of our current clients ask how this is going to affect development. We've certainly wondered. We've had conference calls with the entire retail coach staff discussing as well. And so we think we have a good idea. I mean, as Charles and I have explained, we've spoken with several different site selectors, brokers, real estate managers, and developers, but we really want to get a bigger picture. And so our team has been working on a survey that I hope will go out today that really asks those questions. How is this affecting you? What year are you looking at for development right now? Are development plans on hold? Are your employees furloughed? So we try to keep it a little short, but still get the information. And so we're hoping that our regular contacts are going to fill that out and give us their feedback, and then we will certainly share that feedback with the retail coach community, because I think that's going to give us a better picture. The other thing to realize is this is such a fluid situation that from just last week to this week, how much things have changed. And so we may get one answer today, and then we may have to send out another survey in 3 weeks and see if that still holds true.
Exactly, but that is something to be on the lookout for as we get those results back. I know even at the end of that survey, we had a little bit of fun with it and asking, hey, what are some things you're doing to work at home to keep your sanity? Mine is obviously my happy quarantine cup, just keep a light mood going for working from home. So we'll pass any tips that we get from them along as well. But kind of along the same lines that Caroline was saying, that yeah, there are those furloughs, there are those companies that are shuttering. But at the same time, there's another section of the economy that's really going through tremendous growth right now, even if it might just be in the short term or temporary. There are hundreds of thousands of jobs being created in the midst of this outbreak, whether that's Amazon or Walmart, Instacart personal shoppers going out, these type of supply chain jobs are going through and creating, those jobs, those opportunities, because people are still buying things. Papa John's, Domino's, and Pizza Hut combined are hiring 50,000 people to help with that last mile delivery because people are still eating out and creating that opportunity for business growth. So it's not all doom and gloom. Yes, this is a tough time. It's unprecedented, but there are still growth opportunities. And I think, the resiliency of what we're doing, and because there's so many folks that have, still disposable incomes and still need to eat with some of the trends that we're seeing, there's still going to be growth. It's just figuring out how we reallocate our assets and our resources to make sure that we continue to see growth. And how does that ripple effect into the commercial real estate world?
Yeah, and hey, Charles, if I can for a second too, I was just going to point out, I don't know how many of our client communities, you may have a better percentage in mind, but a lot of our client communities want to expand their grocery offerings. They come to us and they say, we've got a Walmart, we've got a Kroger, but we'd like to get a Publix or a Whole Foods or National Grocers or whatever, Natural Grocers or whatever it is. And I'm so glad that these are the businesses that are open and that are booming and that are hiring and that are having to close their store hours so that they can restock, because these are the ones that I think that we're going to see that are going to have the capital to be able to come out of this and keep growing, and hopefully they won't be as scared of the next pandemic or natural disaster, because they're still going to realize how necessary that they are. And so just looking at this, I mean, Walmart, CVS, even Dollar General. Sometimes we joke that there's a Dollar General on every corner in a lot of places, but hey, that's where I got my toilet paper the other day.
I know right now,
and then Papa John's, Domino's, Pizza Hut. A lot of our more rural communities don't have, are looking for pizza places. And so it's great to see that they're still doing good business right now, because that means that they'll be in growth mode for some of our client communities as well. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of going back to overall trends, this is something that we talked about. 2008 was a major pivotal point in commercial real estate. And ever since 2008, we see most new development has some type of grocery anchor to it. That most new development has had that grocery as their main tenant, because they saw in 2008 that people still needed to eat. And I think what we're going through now just kind of rehammers that home and say, hey, grocery stores are going to stay open during hard times. So I think in commercial development, we're going to continue to see that trend that's going to be heavily food driven, both grocery and even restaurants to an extent of new development, new construction is going to still be focused on food, because even good times, bad times, people still have to eat.
Right.
And then just kind of a few pieces of food for thought that I know you and I and several members of our team have gone back and forth on, talking about how the quarantine and social distancing period is going to ultimately affect retail and restaurant development moving forward. I know one thing that we've talked about is, this pickup and delivery option that really, especially in the shelter at home areas across the country, that they can't have an open dining room. Restaurants have shut down their seating areas. So what is that going to do to the emphasis on drive-through concepts and our concepts that we work with that have traditionally not needed drive-throughs, ones that we need one more tenant to make a deal come through. It's a center space, it's 2,500 square feet. Let's go pick out a few restaurant concepts to fit in there. Things like Chicken Salad Chick, even Jimmy John's that don't necessarily all need a drive-through. Jersey Mike's, Mod Pizza. A lot of these restaurant concepts that not having a drive-through hasn't been an issue. Are they going to look at this and say, hey, if we had a drive-through during the quarantine, it would have been equivalent to this number in sales. So I think that's one thing to look out for is, hey, is drive-through windows going to be that much more important in commercial real estate and placing some of these concepts places moving forward. And then, even beyond that, what are other effects for the physical stores? Looking at this, the hard times where, they're not hitting their sales marks, is it going to kind of further push us to the smaller square footage stores? Are they going to even redesign their stores? Whereas now, a lot of the restaurant concept, you go in and you walk to the back of the store and kind of place your menu, place your order at the back. This health crisis, is it going to make, hey, maybe we should have a takeout door on the side or have a window where they don't have to walk through our entire restaurant to place an order to do takeout. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about. And then lastly, kind of looking at, porch seating. There are a lot of concepts that like to have anywhere from 800 to 1,400 square feet of porch space, and that's kind of been a deal breaker for them. Well, now looking at crisis management, is that additional square footage that they're going to want to have as overhead moving into places like that, or is it not going to be as much as a deal breaker as been in the past? These are the type of things brands are going to have to, to weigh. Hey, do we want to be dog friendly with the porch, and do we want to make sure that we have, that extra square footage when we can't necessarily use it? Then on the flip side of that, as social distancing, we work back into going out and being social. Is having an outdoor option going to make people feel safer? Say, hey, we can go out there, they have a porch, it's more open air, we feel better about going to eat there first for a while. So there's pros and cons, and I don't think there's any real right answer. It's figuring out, hey, what's the balance between those two on the physical aspects of some of the commercial real estate. And then lastly, looking at kind of the operational planning, looking at, hey, are we going to expand our partnership with those delivery apps like we talked about? How can we cut some of the fat and say, hey, we're not going to carry this overhead, because when things get tough, the next disaster, the next health crisis is completely going to change. So that's a big piece of it. And then kind of lastly, I know some things we've talked about in the past, looking at kind of what are some things that EDOs could be thinking about at the moment. So looking at really the remote working aspect of the population, this is going to be a major talking point for retail recruitment coming forward, especially on the restaurant side of things. If we really are moving to a remote working community, a remote working society, how are you properly, quantifying how many folks in your area are working from home? The traditional economic development kind of theory there is talking about, hey, we recruit jobs are going to lead to rooftops, and the rooftops, is going to lead to retail, the traditional method. But we're seeing now it's more of a chicken and the egg of what comes first. And as Matthew, our director of research in our office, kind of elegantly put it, it's maybe getting back to more of a quality of life development, more than workforce development. Because if we have all these people, up to 25% working remote, what's going to ultimately help their decision to where to settle and buy a house is going to be things like schools, what amenities are around them. If they're going to be working from home 2 or 3 days a week, is there a green space nearby that they can go and exercise and not have to leave, their desk for too long? So it's almost getting a fact that, are we coming full circle? Is it becoming more and more of a community development type importance aspect to it? I know Kelly, our founder and CEO, has said for years and years that community development precedes economic development. And I think as we push forward more and more to this working from home, these remote aspects, this crisis management tools that we're seeing be more and more prevalent, that community development is going to be even more and more important, especially as economic developers, to say, hey, these are the talking points. We do have, 25% of our area is highly engaged with looking at, hey, these are the folks that are constantly ordering from Uber Eats. We have a high engagement with food app data. We know that we've got a high engagement of people working from home in our areas. If you have a First Watch, or you put down a restaurant in the shopping center in our community, you're going to have all these access to people that show up in our data, that we really are a community that is going to support your business, whether that's restaurant or retail or otherwise. So I think those are a few important pieces, looking at what to do now as an EDO, things to be thinking now as we kind of have some of this time as we're quarantined or sheltering in place. Do we have any talking points for remote working? Because I think, the workplace population demographics of the past are still going to be important. They're still going to look at how many employees are in your area during the day is going to buy a sandwich from Jimmy John's, but are there other ways that you can augment that data and say, hey, these people aren't showing up in our employment pieces because they're work from home? So as we continue to progress with data and how it works out, I think these are important pieces to look forward on. And I think we may have lost Caroline there at the end, but we have a few minutes for question and answers. I know there's a chat box on your database looking at or on your GoToWebinar control panel. Please go ahead and look at any questions. We have a few that have come in so far. We'll have just a few more minutes, I think. We're about 51 minutes right now. We wanted to get this off under an hour, so I think we're going to make that. I'm trying to answer a few of these questions that have come up, but now if you have any more, please toss them in, and we will continue to answer for just a few minutes as we move forward here. We've got one here looking at ICSC and asking about postponement or canceling recon, and do you have any insight on when that will happen? It's too early to tell, but I thought I'd ask. Thanks. So ICSC, that's something that there really is not a whole lot of information being put out right now. I know with us, there's a lot of forethought putting in, especially as those that are vendors. So I know for us setting up our booth, it's something like 6 weeks out prior that they have to ship out our booth, our supplies. I know April 1st was a major deadline for the prior recon date for May 18th, 19th, 20th on that aspect. I know that was a big piece of it. So I don't think we're going to have a ton of foresight to figure out where the next recon is. I know as of now they're still trying to find a planning aspect of it, as are a lot of conferences going to Vegas, being Conference City USA. But I do know that they are still trying to find any type of way to make it happen this year. I know they don't want to give up on those 30 or 40,000 folks that are trying to make deals this year. So as we get more information, we'll be sure to post that out and keep you updated as well. But I know that it'll be hopefully before the end of the year, get something going. And welcome back, Caroline. Sorry for any technical difficulties you may have.
So you want to talk about working remotely problems. For whatever reason, working from home, and the power just flickered in my house, and I'm on my desktop instead of my laptop or iPad. So it cut off power to the desktop, which also cut off my internet. So the internet and the computer had to reboot. So working remotely, I should have just left and gone to a snooze or restaurant concept.
You could have got a margarita. No one would have known any better. But yeah, this is obviously one of the things that go with work remote. I think we're all kind of figuring out how this thing goes as we move forward. We've got a few more questions coming in, looking at how can you speak to a bit to how these trends relate to development in rural areas and what some of the scaled implications you might look like in areas where these chains or breakfast concepts may not be flocking to. I know we have a lot of rural communities that we work with. That's kind of our bread and butter that our network can kind of help them the most. Have you had any conversations about rural areas lately?
Well, one note about that is in a rural area, I'm thinking of a small town rural area myself, because I work in our Mississippi office, and though I live in a college town, we still aren't big enough yet to have a snooze or another break an egg or eggs up grill and that sort of thing. But we do have a local restaurant owner who started a restaurant called the Breakfast Club. Similar concept to what the others are, but just kind of built it after those, and that has done really well, and is also offering curbside delivery and curbside takeout and delivery during this period. And so even if you aren't big enough to have these numbers to fit these new restaurant trends, you can certainly have some of your current restaurant owners who want to open a second or third location, but maybe not of the same thing. Open something that would model after this, and it would still do very well in your community. Rural areas, I think, are going to be hit by this, because if you think about your restaurant tax, your hotel tax, your hospitality taxes, that's what's funding a lot of the infrastructure in some of our rural areas. And so taking away the hospitality, taking away, I saw that one of our client communities the other day usually had like 75 to 85% occupancy in their hotels, and they're down to like 6 to 10% occupancy right now, which is reasonable. I mean, we aren't supposed to be traveling, we're supposed to be staying home. And I was kind of wondering who are the people that are in those hotel rooms. But obviously that's going to be a big hit to their economy. Losing the restaurant tax, which is just drastically going to be cut in half right now, is going to be a big, big hit to these rural economies. And so it's going to be deciding what you can and can't do infrastructure wise with these tax breaks. Having said that, I think that developers are still going to be very willing and ready to develop when the time is right. And so this will really make you look and think twice about what developments you're allowing, about what you want to put your emphasis on. For example, I was saying a few minutes ago about the grocery stores. If you've been needing a grocery store, or maybe your local grocery store isn't quite cutting it during this period, or maybe they're the one that's doing great and the national chain isn't quite cutting it during this period, maybe it'll make you think twice about the next store that you want your retail recruitment firm or your economic developer to aggressively recruit. And so I think that everyone's going to face this challenge a bit differently. And I think that it's just a conversation to have about what your community is really going to need if and when you go through this again, but also as you come out of this.
Right, and kind of folding into another question we got coming in, looking at kind of smaller communities that maybe don't have all the amenities to kind of recruit, rooftops and citizen recruitment, as we kind of had it labeled there, the back past. Baby steps, like the question mentioned, is really the big piece to go out about it. I know we work in a small community kind of outside Charlotte in Baden, North Carolina, a small town of about 1,200 folks, but they're right there on Baden Lake, which is a huge outdoor amenity. And I know that town is working a lot with federal and state funds to help get their boat ramp converged into a large park with a mile walking track that's posted out for quarter miles for exercise and pieces like that. So in downtimes like this, where it's social distancing, what better to go out to nature and get away from everybody. So I think there are some small pieces to go out with some of the community development aspects of it to figure out, hey, why is this a good place to live? What's your proximity to the larger markets? I think those are some of the talking points that you can help drive some of the citizen and community development aspects for smaller communities.
Yeah, absolutely. In a rural community, in some ways you're better off right now because, Charles, you're sheltering in place in Dallas and not supposed to get out unless you're going to the grocery store or the bank or whatever. And in Mississippi, I have not been given a shelter in place rule. And so, I'm not supposed to gather with crowds of larger than 10 people, but our retailers and our restaurants are still allowed to stay open right now. And I think that we've got some things that you guys aren't able to do. And so I think in rural areas, we're going to see hopefully, possibly more development because they're going to realize that they don't want to have to go and don't need to go to the metro hub, but that development needs to happen rurally.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to like the food desert and all those other aspects that when time like these things happen, because you don't have the population density, you're not under as stringent rules to do that thing. So it's really an advantage in times like this. I think those are some talking points that might help drive development. We've got a few more questions. We're right under 1 hour. Maybe we can get to just one more, looking at some of these, figuring out. We had one talking about tracking the trends in telecommuting and how it relates to shift in the market for both retail and office. I know looking at kind of telecommuting aspects, it's really a data piece that is really lagging behind just about everything else that we're doing. I know with the global workforce analytics, they're working off data that's about 9 months removed. So every fall they get data for the year before. So right now, the latest data for those workplace analytics were in the fall of 2019. I looked at 2018. So we're lagging behind that. And I think part of this kind of quarantine aspect is people are going to say, focus, hey, we need that data. It's going to help us make decisions. So I think that's going to be a major ripple effect of this area. But then and overall, with retail and office, I know there are some studies that go and look at flex space. And I know it's had exponential growth over the last 5 years. Because the penetration of the flexible space has grown so quickly. It's grown from less than 0.5 up to 2.5 over just a number of years, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but in the trends that's a very quick jump, and it counts for several million people. So I think there are going to be trends in office, and I think because of this quarantine period, it's going to be a higher focus, and hopefully we'll get more and more and better data coming out of this. And I hope that's one of the final takeaways from this.
Yeah.
And there are a few more questions, but we'll try to get those answered. Follow-ups on some of this. We just hit an hour. We know you get a lot of emails. I get 4 or 5 emails a day about webinars. People are doing more and more commuting in this type of atmosphere. We've been doing these monthly webinars for a number of years now. So we thank you for coming back and sticking with us. And we're going to try to do more and more and try to make sure that your time spent at home for the 2/3 of you guys that are stuck at home, try to give you more and more content, to try to make sure we are still being productive, even though we're not traditional office space. Our contact is there on the slides. Feel free to reach out to us with any additional questions or anything you may have. There's still a time for growth, and folks are still poised for economic development and looking for sites. It's still something that we can do. With the loss of major trade shows, we know it's very hard to kind of have some of that face time. A lot of communities have had their face time taken away from them this year. So if there is anything we can do in the short term, in the long term, give us a call. We know these are unprecedented times. We're not a one-size-fits-all type firm. So just if you want to call and talk, even if it's just to brainstorm ideas, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you and talk to you. And I'll leave you with that. And Caroline, if you have any closing remarks or not.
No, just thank you so much for joining us. I know that these are very weird times and unprecedented times, and so I hope that this gave you something to just think about while you're working remotely or in the office or wherever you may be. And as Charles said, just reach out to us with any questions. And if there's anything else that you'd like to hear about for future webinars, go ahead and shoot us an email. We'd love to be thinking about those and be able to answer those questions in the future as well.
Great. Thanks a bunch, everyone. Stay safe and don't forget to smile today and try to make sure your home office stays cheery and optimistic. So thanks, and we'll tune in soon.